If India has to achieve its economic ambitions, the logistics sector must be the backbone for this, while improved infrastructure and increased emphasis on digitalization is going to be the key. The logistics sector needs to do much more to cater to the evolving business landscape. To talk more on the subject, we have with us today Abhishek Bansal, co-founder and CEO, Shadowfax. Abhishek, good to have you with us today.
Good to be here. Thank you for inviting me for this conversation.
Great. So let's go get to the first question. What is your view on the logistics sector in India? Ever since the pandemic, supply chain has been the focus the world over.
I think India logistics sector is still in a very nascent stage. I think the amount of infrastructure development that is happening in India has completely transformed logistics in the last 10 years. But there's still miles and miles to go when we look at the West, when we look at some of our global counterparts in terms of logistics inefficiency, in terms of transportation cost, in terms of how e-commerce as a sector needs to basically operate it. Just to give a quick quick understanding on the numbers, globally, the cost of logistics is somewhere about 7.5 to 8% of the GDP. In India, that is today trending at about 12 to 13% of GDP. And if India has to become efficient, if the price of goods has to come down, logistics cost has to come down. And that is basically somewhere where a lot of infrastructure is going to fundamentally change. I think there is a huge contribution of the public sector and the government in this evolution of the logistics sector. And this is not just in the hands of a this is not just purely a technology intervention or something that the private sector can alone do. A quick example is the pace at which the road infrastructure in this country is getting built. The amount of roads, the way the infrastructure has been transformed over the last 10 years has been phenomenal. And it's been a boom for logistics industry. Just to give an insight, national time between the metro cities has come down by about 25% due to better infrastructure of the roads. And that has resulted in lower cost, it has resulted in better turnaround times, more utilization of your trucks on the ground. So I think infrastructure has a big role to play when it comes to India's logistics ecosystem. Another very interesting example that I have today is around the railways. Okay, how freight and dedicated railway corridors can actually reduce the cost of the Indian logistics ecosystem. And I think the amount of work that is happening on the public sector side, the way our our current railway infrastructure is now being getting enabled for some of the freight movement, and even a lot of e-commerce movement have started to happen on the rail today. So I think these are some of the fantastic development, but I would still call that we are at least 10 to 15 years behind some of our global counterparts. And the way I think some of these things are happening, we are probably going in the right direction, but there's a lot to do in making our country more efficient.
Right. So, we all talk about stuff like resiliency. Do you think logistics sector in India has been able to build resilience and can absorb shocks and disruptions?
That's a very good question to ask. See, in India, logistics sector again, I think it's probably more resilient than some of the global counterparts that we have seen. Over here in India, I think the bigger disruption that probably happened. India is a very difficult country from a resilience building standpoint itself. Okay, the amount of demographic uh, disruption that can potentially happen, the amount of weather disruption that happen in India in different parts of the country, the supply chain need to be resilient to a whole next level over here. Okay, I think Indian ecosystem, Indian infrastructure providers, especially some of the transporters, road handlers. I think the resilient handling in India is phenomenal. I think the way we responded to COVID, the way I think some of our things happened in COVID, the way state borders basically manage into the new e-way bill ecosystem. Okay, now it's all centralized. The technology is all centralized. So moving from one part of India to another is pretty much tech driven today. Okay, so I think overall in COVID we would say that probably the resilience shown in India by the logistics supply chains are far higher than what we have at least seen in some of the global counterparts. I mean, we have all heard about stories in China about how the entire supply chain got disrupted because of rapid shutdowns, complete cities going down. So I think some of those things in India have been managed in a much better manner. And I think logistics in India is definitely more resilient than some of the things that we are hearing across the world.
Right. India also, recently unveiled the national policy. What impact do you think this will have on the sector?
Again, I would say this is pretty still early days on the overall national logistics policy. I think some of these things are still at a very micro level. People are still trying to understand and figure out how some of these things are going to impact. One very important uh, outcome of this national logistics policy is having a very strong data and a control system. Okay, just understanding how basically shared capacities can work across basically through the centralized data storage that basically comes along with the NLP. uh, our view is that this is going to create, in the long term, this is going to make the logistics system more efficient. It is going to bring the utilization of all the assets at least 15 to 20% above than what it is today. Okay, just by basically having a better insight on data, having a better insight in terms of utilization of which truck is going empty, which truck is going full. How do I utilize and crowdsource some of those capacities across the country? I think that is something that is going to basically improve the utilization. But if I were to be honest over here, I think at a micro level, everyone is just trying to understand and comprehend how best to basically create a policy based on the national interest.
Okay. So, what are the key trends that you're seeing in the logistics sector, especially when it comes to India, and what are the threats and
I think India again, the a whole new trend that we are seeing right now is around multimodal logistics. What we mean by multimodal logistics is basically just not depending on basically road transport and trucks to conduct your logistics ecosystem. Today, trains and freight is becoming a big part of the logistics corridor. And the amount of even, and I'm taking examples of e-commerce itself. Today, e-commerce moves about 10% of the overall shipments through railway freight. 5 years back, this did not even exist. Okay. Today, a big part of the conversation is how do you make waterways as a medium for transportation in India? Okay, for freight transportation in India. So this whole element around multimodal logistics is a big theme that we are hearing. The second theme, which I've already spoken about, is around how do you centralize data? How do you ensure that basically your assets are not operating in silos? How can a asset which is basically being utilized by one particular party can actually be accessible to everyone out there? It basically becomes a shared asset through common access of technology and data. So I think that is a very big theme that we are also hearing and seeing in the market today, where there are a lot of new age companies, new age tech players coming in, trying to aggregate those assets and create basically more efficient ecosystem.
like any threats that you see?
So I think again, no trends in specific. I think there are a lot of private players we can talk about who are actually enabling some of these things to happen. There are a lot of data platforms which are making this happen. There is a huge play even ONDC is making in making logistics accessible. See, the real power or unlocking of value will come when you completely unbundle logistics from basically, let's say there is a truck which is getting operated from a single entity. If it get unbundled from that entity and it is accessible to everyone, basically if there's an empty truck going on that road, can any entity, any business use it, provided obviously the cost, the tonnage, the utilization of that basically comes into picture. So I think some of those data aggregation things are happening even at the private player level, and even with some of these public good platforms like ONDC. And ONDC has made a big way in creating some of these data platforms, and even for e-commerce, making like just unbundling logistics into a separate entity. And because that is something which is going to make logistics in the long term more accessible and more democratic to everyone in our country.
Right. So, if I can stay with, NBC, that you touched the topic, you recently inked a partnership with ONDC. What are the contours of it? What do you expect?
So typically, the way ONDC works is they ultimately believe that there is you should not have one player. You should have all the power there is a seller, there's a customer, there's a logistics entity. Can you create an interface where each of these three entities interact with each other in a very transparent manner and in a real-time manner, whereas nobody is arm twisting the other party. Okay, there is no one platform which is making all the money. It's actually distributed between sellers. The customer gets their own interest. They have their own choice. Logistics players get their own choice. They have a basically a level playing democratic fee. What essentially this means is today all these large marketplaces in India and even in the US, if you look at that, they offered a bundled service. Okay, as a customer, you go online, there is a seller, there's a logistics, but that platform has all the power in the world to control the outcome. What ONDC says is basically you will unbundle all of these capabilities so that if the entire margin that has to be made basically is made by these three parties and the value is created at that level. And I think that sounds uh, I think truly what basically India stands for, right? India, if you look at the platform, if you look at how the evolution happened, it is powered by the kiranas, it is powered by the smaller sellers, it is powered by independent businessmen who are actually creating, and that is what ONDC enables. ONDC is just a pure play tech platform where each of these entrepreneurs across the country can actually come and meet and basically do business over a seamless tech platform. Again, it's still very in a nascent stage, we would call it. If this works out, I mean, this might actually be a bigger deal than even UPI. If you look at from a 2 decade horizon in India, at least 40% of the overall commerce in the next 2 decades is going to happen digitally. Okay, if in that kind of an ecosystem, and India is a massive market today. It's a multi-trillion dollar market today. Okay, if 40% of the commerce starts happening digitally, and if it happens through a government enabled interface, like how probably UPI happens today, okay, it gives tremendous power and tremendous value to the citizens of the country. Everybody who's interacting, be it a seller, be it a delivery partner, be it a end customer. I mean, the amount of value that you can unlock is significant, and that is something which can basically make a standout factor for a country like India.
Right. So, how's your hyperlocal and how's your e-commerce business doing? Any signs of a slowdown?
No, it's actually quite interesting. I think over the last quarter, we have actually seen growth every month. Okay, over the last at least 2 quarters, I think there was some sort of slowdown, or basically we would not call it slowdown, probably reduced customer spending in the November-December month of last year. But again, I don't think there is any macro issue in India. Most of that spending, I think the way people change their spending was probably people were spending elsewhere other than commerce. People are not spending on buying products or buying food, but probably they are spending on travel. If you look at travel, if you look at hotels, if you look at some of these related ancillary industries, they actually saw an all-time high in terms of spending. I think the customer spending in India has been shifting or shaping differently post-COVID, but we don't see any sign of any slowdown. Probably if you look at some of the countries like a US or a UK, there is definitely sign of slowdown. There's a like the entire commerce industry has actually degrown over the last year or so, but not in India. In India, we see strong traction at the customer side. Even today, when probably every platform has reduced discounts, nobody is doing marketing there. The discounts have actually gone completely off over the last 1 year or so, but the demand is very very strong, and I think that is going to continue to happen because see in India the online adoption is still very low as compared to some of the global counterparts. You look at China today, about 25% of their commerce happens online. In the US, about 33% happens online. In India, that is still in single digits. So we are sitting at a very, very low base, and the way internet is penetrating, the way services are becoming more accessible, the way some of these online products are actually becoming even more cheaper than the offline products available. I think that will continue probably a very good trend in online penetration over the next few quarters as well.
Right. So, give us some numbers of of your business. How many delivery partners do you employ? The number of employees, number of cities, how many orders do you fill daily?
Yeah. So Shadowfax today, we are present in close to about 1,900 cities and towns. We service close to about 12,000 pin codes across the country. And this is again, we are present in probably every state of the country, every union territory today. Uh, predominantly today our business is an intercity business. About 80% of our business comes intercity. 20% is what we call as hyper local, which is like more like a 30-minute delivery. But phenomenally, we are now an intercity player. Okay. Today, on an average basis, on an average day, we are doing close to 1.5 million deliveries a day. Okay. Typically, this forms about close to 13-14% market share in the overall industry of the country, which is basically going outsourced, like to the outsourced player. That's the industry today. And again, this comprises of hot food, this comprises of e-commerce, this comprises of grocery, pharmaceutical. We are doing everything which is basically getting delivered to you and me as a customer. So as an organization, we only focus on categories where we deliver to the end customer, and we don't do any less than truckload kind of models or B2B kind of models. So our business model is completely driven by the end customer macro today. And over the year, I mean, we have like just between the last year and now, we are at a 40% growth levels, despite like whatever you say on the market slowdown. I mean, we have shown exceptional growth out there. On a monthly basis today, about 1.2 lakh unique people work on the platform as delivery boys. So these are like monthly active users, what we call it. But typically on a daily basis, close to about 45,000 people work as delivery partners on the platform across these 2,000 cities that we have. Today, Shadowfax, again, as I mentioned, we are almost there in about 2,000 odd cities of the country. Uh, and again, we employ close to about 8,000 people directly and indirectly through the organization.
Right. What are your views in this 10-minute delivery offering? Is that a space, do you think, that is feasible, that is something that you're looking at?
Well, that's an interesting sector, and I know media has a lot of point of view around whether this is even needed or not, whether how good is it for the customer, how good is it for the delivery partner. See, we have a very positive view on the space. We don't. Again, I'm not saying that 10-minute delivery is a universal game. It should be done, but again. Groceries in India, I think there are a lot of organizations who have cracked the way for a 15 to 20-minute delivery. It's actually a phenomenal model from a unit economics as well, because the delivery partner has to travel less. It is more eco-friendly because you don't need a bike. You can actually do it on a cycle. Today, quick commerce in India, about 60% of that happens on a cycle or an EV, which is extremely eco-friendly as well. Because the distances are low, delivery partners don't end up traveling on highways or on flyovers. They're probably located in very small vicinity of a locality. And and delivery partners actually love it. They're willing to work at a lower cost just to work in this space. So contrary to a lot of views that we hear on social media, it is something where we have seen people actually loving it on the ground, in terms of as a preferred choice of working perspective. But again, as an organization, we are believers that online grocery is going to work out. Whether it's 15-minute, 20-minute, 30-minute, I think that is for probably some of these larger organizations to figure out how to refill that inventory at that particular pace. But from a logistics standpoint, we are a firm believer that this space is here to exist.
Interesting. Last question, Abhishek. How was last year in terms of revenue? How do you see it this year panning out? Any expansion plans that you can?
I think last year has been phenomenal for us. See, we as an organization have been gaining market share, in terms of just sheer growth. From a single digit market share, we are now in about 13-14% range in terms of overall market share in the industry. Uh, I think we'll continue doing that. We'll continue gaining market share and continue growing. One of the key enablers for our growth is basically a city expansion. Okay. So today, as I said, we are in about close to 2,000 cities and towns today across the country. But last year we were in probably half of that number. We were only in thousands. So I think the pace of expansion is phenomenal in terms of just reaching out to probably every small town, every small district of the country, and enabling logistics to happen over there. And we do it again through a very asset light sort of manner in terms of the way we expand, the way we basically cover some of these cities today. But again, as an organization, we'll continue growing. We believe that again there is a lot of room to expand our market share in the next 3 to 4 quarters. we'll continue expanding our cities and basically the geographical coverage that we are building today. And we believe that again this year will probably be growing faster than the market at about close to about a 50% year-on-year space.
Abhishek, thank you so much for sharing your views on the sector. It was lovely having you with us today.
Thank you for having me. Great to always speak and talk about our business. Thank you.